Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. How will Taiwan's new president protect the country's freedom and sovereignty while preventing China from starting a war? Lai Ching-te was sworn in as the fifth directly elected president of Taiwan. A son of a coal miner raised by a single mother, 64-year-old Lai has served as congressman, a local mayor, Taiwan's premier, and its vice president over 25 years. The Harvard-educated medical doctor entered politics during the third Taiwan-Strait crisis in 1996, when Beijing fired missiles around the independently ruled island. 3 decades on, Lai enters the highest office at a time when China is increasingly ramping up external and internal pressure, demanding that Taiwan accept its sovereignty, and Taiwan's opposition parties, who hold the majority in parliament, are signalling discord. So, what lies ahead for Lai and Taiwan over the next 4 years? Joining us today are Vincent Chao, Taipei City councilor, also Huang Kwei-bo, National Chengchi University Professor of Diplomacy, and Amanda Hsiao, International Crisis Group Senior Analyst for China. A very warm welcome to the show, everyone. Lai has promised to continue the presidency of his predecessor, Tsai Ing-wen. His presidency signals Taiwan's resistance to China's so-called goal of reunification. But Lai's weak majority has also given Beijing room to weave its narrative, one in which the PRC says Taiwanese are still open to becoming part of China. In his inauguration speech, Lai outlined key elements in his plan for Taiwan of stability, maintaining the status quo, self-confidence, raising Taiwan's international profile, responsibility, contributing to the international community as a force for good, and solidarity, Taiwanese standing together to resist China's attempts to divide it. Let's take a look.
由于两岸的未来对世界的局势有决定性的影响，承接民主化台湾的我们，将是和平的舵手。新政府将秉持4个坚持：不卑不亢，维持现状。我也要呼吁中国停止对台湾文攻武吓，一起和台湾承担全球的责任，致力于维持台海及区域的和平稳定，确保全球免于战争的恐惧。因此，我希望中国正视中华民国存在的事实，尊重台湾人民的选择。拿出诚意，和台湾民选合法的政府，在对等尊严的原则下，以对话取代对抗，交流取代围堵，进行合作。
Professor Huang, let me come to you first. So, Lai Ching-te has described himself as previously as a pragmatic worker for Taiwan independence. In the same sentence, he said that Taiwan is already independent and there is no need to declare independence formally. In the speech that we heard this morning, was there anything new?
As Republic of China's 16th president, I think William Lai has said something repeatedly as what Tsai Ing-wen has said in the past 8 years in order to ensure the US and the rest of the world that his policy will not be provocative. Also, I think if we would like to talk about something new, then I think some terms he used in his speech would be a little bit different from Tsai Ing-wen's past speech. Especially those politically sensitive terms. Okay. So whether or not that would trigger some negative response from Beijing, I have no idea.
But could you tell us what they are?
For example, he tried to use China to refer to the Beijing authorities, while Taiwan or the Republic of China, Taiwan here. That's something that I haven't seen in the past 2 inaugurational speeches made by President Tsai Ing-wen. So the response
So Tsai Ing-wen said?
Tsai Ing-wen didn't say China in his inaugurational speeches.
So how did she refer to China?
The other side or Beijing authorities or something like that. Okay, so that's something new. And also he talked about something new. For example, he talked about solidarity with people within Taiwan. And I think that's very important, especially when the pressure from the Beijing authorities increases and when the society in Taiwan has been split into different political parties or political influences. And that's something I think this president and his successors need to pay more attention, because Taiwan has been a very divided society, and I do not want to see Taiwan to become a divided country.
Okay, 2 points, Vincent. Number one, the term that Lai used, is it different to what Tsai Ing-wen or the DPP uses to refer to China? And secondly, the issue of solidarity.
Well, the first part is easy. It's emphatically no. In fact, since 2016, the government has used China to refer to the PRC. I mean, it's part of colloquial usage. It's also part of international, I think, recognition. But more importantly, I think it signifies the fact that we understand that when most of the international community refers to China, they refer to the PRC, not Taiwan or the R.O.C. And so I think, if we look at past historical speeches, including by President Tsai, that's amply reflected there. So I would argue against this notion that this is something brand new. But I mean, as a whole, what we can see for the inauguration speech itself is it's pretty much on mark. It's on mark with what he's been saying since the campaign, with what he said during his election night victory speech on January 13th. It's also on mark with what we've seen in terms of the continuation of President Tsai's steady cross-strait policies over the past 8 years. I mean, he mentioned a couple of things. He mentioned, first one, that he will maintain the cross-strait status quo. He mentioned 不卑不亢, which is that we will continue to resist any sorts of pressure from the other side. He said that we will continue to seek dialogue over confrontation. And finally, I think what was important, I think to many observers, is he mentioned repeatedly the Republic of China, including the R.O.C. Constitution. So I think taken all together, what we're going to see, not only in the immediate aftermath of this inauguration, but certainly in the next 4 to 8 years, is that we will have, at least on Taipei's part, a steady, pragmatic, and no surprise-based cross-strait approach, which I think is not only in line with Taiwanese public opinion, but also international communities. I think these are as well. And I don't think, something he said struck with me, and I don't think anybody wants to see war, and there are no winners in war. And so Taiwan's going to do everything in our power to ensure that conflict does not take place. But it takes two to tango. And so, like he said in his speech, the other side, China, needs to also recognize that we do have a desire to sit down and talk. And we hope that they choose to do so.
Amanda, was there anything new in there, either from past DPP stances or from Lai himself?
So I think on the whole, the framing that Lai uses attempts to message this show of continuity from Lai's policies. But I think the trick might be in some of the details. So there's one notable difference in his speech from both his own position on the night of the elections and from the way that Tsai has tended to describe the cross-strait policy, both in her inaugural addresses in 2016 and also 2020. Lai talks about the importance of acting in accordance with the Republic of China Constitution, but he, unlike President Tsai, did not link it to cross-strait relations in this speech. So President Tsai's position has been cross-strait relations should be conducted in accordance with our constitution. And the significance of this is essentially that within Taiwan's own constitution, there remain elements in that constitution that can be used to suggest that there is this notion of one China, right? There's references to mainland territories within this constitution. And so it served as this sort of conveniently ambiguous framework that could be used as a gesture to Beijing without the government here in Taiwan explicitly confirming or affirming this idea of one China. It's been this ambiguous framework, and Lai, I think here, did not make that link today.
Professor Huang, let's talk about now, in the lead up to the inauguration, opposition parties essentially beseeched Lai to hold out an olive branch to the PRC, to Beijing. Do you think that he did that? Because after all, he did talk about reciprocal tourism and also Chinese students coming over to Taiwan.
I would put that this way. Whatever William Lai has suggested in his inauguration speech is a measure to return to what the two sides of the strait has been done before. That is, tourists and degree students or non-degree students. So these are something that the two sides normally has done before. But nowadays, all of a sudden, to resume what we has been doing for the past, between 2008 and 2016. Now it become like a delivery of goodwill. So I don't get it, because this is something for the benefit of the resumption of cross-strait relations. And so the real goodwill for William Lai to deliver to the other side, I would say, is his claim to abide by the R.O.C. Constitution. And as Amanda just implied, that I think it's a pity that William Lai's touch on the R.O.C. Constitution is for his insistence of the R.O.C. and PRC do not belong to each other. So, and it's not for how William Lai should carry out his mainland China policy, but it's about how the two sides are so different and should not be subordinate to each other. So I think he can be more proactive in stating his mainland China policy, but not only stating his political position towards the current cross-strait relations.
I think it's worth noting, however, that this idea of the PRC and R.O.C. are not subordinate to each other is not only grounded in fact, but it's also grounded in past historical statements, not only by the DPP, but also by President Tsai Ing-wen. So it's not something that's new or unique to President Lai Ching-te. In fact, this idea of the R.O.C. and PRC not being subordinate to each other, it's actually inherent in the 1999 resolution on Taiwan's future that was promulgated by the DPP. And it's part of the 4 commitments that President Tsai has laid out as well. So, again, I think what we're seeing in this speech is very much an emphasis on continuing the steady, principled approach President Tsai has taken over the past 8 years.
Amanda, let me bring you in there. So, did it seem like it was an olive branch, or at least, steps towards that from Lai's side? If there is a resumption of tourism on both sides and students that come, that's surely, moving towards better cross-strait relations.
Yeah, I think I'll say this. I mean, of course, it's a good gesture at this moment, at the top of his term, to say that he's interested in resuming tourism and student exchanges. Those are probably the lowest hanging fruit right now in the cross-strait relationship. And we've seen some indications from Beijing's side of some incremental interest in resuming group tourism. So that is positive. And should those resume, it would improve the atmosphere in the relationship. But what it would not change is the fundamental differences between the two sides as to what is the cross-strait relationship. So on the question of the basis for dialogue, I think what we've seen from Lai's speech today is that those positions remain very far apart.
Professor Huang, would you like to talk about dialogue, the possibility, and both sides say they want dialogue? However, what's the likelihood of this happening?
It's what we call the positional bargaining. I mean, Beijing has this very firm position that there's only one China, and at most, the 1992 consensus would serve as the foundation for cross-strait dialogue. While the DPP government has some other insistence, that is, I would say that it's like one China, one Taiwan, but the DPP government doesn't want to say that explicitly. And also the DPP government does not provide some more specific or concrete bargaining chips on the negotiating table. So my point is that for Beijing has its bargaining chips on the table. That is, at least you have to return to the 92 consensus, then we can talk. That's Beijing's position. But the DPP's position is that I got 4 insistences, okay, and I would like to have a mutual dialogue on the basis of dignity, reciprocity, and equality. But what exactly is that bargaining chip or the negotiating condition for the DPP to, either to negotiate or to exchange with the CPC government? I haven't seen that. So I think that's something that Lai Ching-te, William Lai should do more or more proactively in order to promote the possibility of cross-strait dialogue.
Vincent, should Lai do more or should Xi Jinping do more?
Well, I think the DPP's position is actually much more simpler than Beijing's position, because what Beijing is asking for essentially is a precondition before dialogue can even take place, which is that you have to accept the 92 consensus, which is inherently tied to the concept of one China. And this is something that's not supported by the majority of the Taiwanese people. I mean, frankly speaking, we're a democracy. If this was supported and people wanted this to happen, they would have elected somebody else. They elected Lai Ching-te precisely for the reason that they elected Tsai Ing-wen previous to that, which is that the KMT's cross-strait positions are seen as out of touch by the majority of the Taiwanese public. And as a result, I mean, I'll look at this. I said the DPP's position is much easier, and it is. The DPP, all it wants is having dialogue without this precondition. I mean, Tsai Ing-wen and Lai Ching-te have both been clear on that. As long as people are willing to sit down on the basis of having no preconditions, then anything can be discussed. But it's unfortunate, which is that the CCP has put this barrier there, knowing full well the difficulties of reaching that barrier. I guess my hope is, and I believe the international community probably shares that same hope, is that Beijing would be able to say that, hey, we don't necessarily have to accept the 92 consensus, and let's sit down and discuss a way for peace and stability going forward. And if they're willing to do that, I think they'll find an emphatically willing partner in the DPP.
Amanda, let's turn now to Beijing's response so far. I mean, we obviously have been in Taiwan on the alert for any military drills or exercises. This doesn't seem to have materialized. Let's talk about what you make of Beijing's response so far around the inauguration.
Well, I think let's wait and see and give Beijing a chance to respond. My sense is that Beijing will have to respond in some way, if only to make clear to both audiences here in Taiwan, but also to Washington and to their own domestic population, that they disapprove of Lai Ching-te's position on the cross-strait relationship, just like they were never fully happy or satisfied with Tsai's position. So some sort of response is likely to occur.
What kind of response do you think could occur?
I mean, in recent months, what we've seen is that the military pressures have held. There wasn't, until the last week, there's been a slight increase in military pressures. But for the last couple of months, they've held steady on the military pressures and begun to diversify into other forms of pressures. So for instance, the regularization of law enforcement patrols around Jingmen, and other attempts essentially to erode or to challenge Taiwan sovereignty. So it's very possible that in the coming days we could see, on top of military pressures, we could see economic pressures, we could see the ending of another diplomatic relationship, etc. There's many tools at Beijing's disposal.
Professor Huang, you've said yourself that you believe Beijing will not give Lai Ching-te a honeymoon period, and some analysts have said that, that they believe that Beijing would exert a maximum pressure campaign. So is there a sense that Beijing may be feeling that it's running out of time for its goal towards reunification?
Yes, I do say that there's no honeymoon period between Taipei and Beijing after William Lai's inauguration. And I do agree with Amanda that, yes, the Beijing authorities have had a lot of measures to offset Taiwan's effort to expand its international space. And also, I would like to say that, even though William Lai continued Tsai Ing-wen's policies, foreign policy, mainland policy, but I think William Lai's self-claim as a pragmatic worker for Taiwan independence has brought a very negative image in the eyes of Beijing leaders. Therefore, I'm afraid that Beijing is not going to give Lai Ching-te any easy time, but continue to pressurize Taiwan in order to make Taiwan, push Taiwan to the corner and probably make Lai Ching-te make some more concessions. But, I think that's also very unfortunate for the interactions between the two sides.
On the point about independence, how likely do you think it is that Lai Ching-te would push for something like formal independence?
Well, it depends on what you say formal, because our policy has always been that Taiwan is already a sovereign, independent country, formerly called the Republic of China. That's not going to change at all under Lai administration, regardless of how many terms he serves. I mean, he's been clear on that. I sat with him when he took the Bloomberg interview during his election campaign. He was asked this question 3 times in succession, and he was very clear on each time. It's like, no, we don't have a plan because Taiwan is already an independent country called the R.O.C. That's not going to change, and I think that's very much in line with Taiwanese public opinion. So, when we talk about the status quo, it's not just rhetoric, it's action. So in terms of action, what he's going to do is something I think that President Tsai has been very successful at, which is not only moving the DPP to the center in terms of merging the two ideas of Taiwan and R.O.C., but it's also by showing a more unified front to the international community that we're not going to rock the boat. We're going to remain steady, we're going to be consistent, and we're going to have no surprises.
To echo Vincent's argument, I think President Lai needs to show some more consistent attitude toward the country, because I still remember during the campaign he said that the R.O.C. is a myth and the R.O.C. constitution is a disaster. So without this consistent attitude toward the country, then whatever effort made by the Lai administration would be in vain, because the key counterpart, Cross-strait, wouldn't believe in what he said about constitution and whatsoever, in line with the benefit development of cross-strait relations.
Well, I think Professor Huang brings up a salient point, but I do have to say, the part about the R.O.C. Constitution being a disaster was made during the debate. It was made in the context of talking about sort of how we've seen pressures from across the strait develop over time. And so if we're going to treat the R.O.C. Constitution as a magic shield to say that if we say the Constitution, all of a sudden these pressures will alleviate and dissipate, that's just not true. So that was exactly what Lai Ching-te meant during the debate, and there's a transcript of that floating around. But I do agree to a certain extent that it comes down to perceptions. And it's true that I think the Chinese government has a perception that's very hard to shake. But I'm hopeful that as a responsible country, as a country that I think has a lot invested in terms of peace and stability, they can come to their senses and understand that if they're willing to sit down and work together with the DPP administration, and now's the best time to do it with the new administration, I think they'll find willing partners.
Amanda, I want to just end on this idea that, which is what Beijing often says, that it tries to paint Lai Ching-te as endangering peace. If we can talk about that as well as the status quo, and whether you believe that Beijing is attempting to change the status quo.
I think that changes in China's attitude and capabilities are very clear in the last 8 years. This is a China that is more capable militarily, economically, but also wants to use those capabilities to increasingly impose its terms on Taiwan. Beijing is much less interested in being consultative, right, with the government here. And so I do think it's a Beijing that's increasingly impatient with the current status quo, but it's not one that I think is ready to overturn that status quo. We talked about some of the pressures or sticks that China has been imposing on Taiwan, but you mentioned this at the top of the program. Since the elections, the narrative out of Beijing has been interesting. They've come up with this justification pointing to the fact that the election results, for them, they're saying that means that the DPP don't represent the mainstream in Taiwan. And that's their way almost of declaring that to their own people, our policy is working.
And is that realistic, do you think?
I don't think it's necessarily realistic, but there's another purpose for this, which is that they're creating some space for themselves. They're saying to their own domestic constituencies that we can be patient on this issue, we have the situation under control, and from that we can infer that they do not need to take any drastic measures anytime soon. It's a way of justifying to their own domestic audience. Now, does it represent the reality on the ground here in Taiwan? I mean, I think polling makes that very clear, that the majority of Taiwanese want to maintain the status quo, and a very, very small minority is even interested in unification.
We'll have to end it there. Thank you so much, Vincent Chao, Huang Kwei-bo, and Amanda Hsiao for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.
At Connected, we believe in the power of dialogue.
Taipei 101 station.
It's not just about the headlines, it's about finding common ground. Join the conversation.
Connected with Divya Gopalan on Taiwan Plus.
Start your weekend with a cup of coffee and a moment to reflect on what happened this week.
Hello and welcome.
We've got you covered, from defense and politics to high tech and the arts.
Not just to Taiwan, the whole world is watching.
You make the coffee, we make the news. Here's what happened on Taiwan Plus.
你经历过人生的话，你发现说，我们大部分都是爱美。
我自己少遇见一朵花，我可能就不是这个样子。
开始思考什么叫做一个本土性。
大声的唱出来说我是台湾人。